Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to record. Yeah. So Bianca goes to, you go to government hospitals, hey? For your ASD and ADHD. You're on mute.
You were saying, Tracy?
So for your ASD and ADHD, you go to government hospitals.
Yes, I'm being seen by the psychiatrist at Helen Joseph.
And who is that? Just for interest sake.
It depends on who's available.
Yeah.
So you don't usually see the same doctor all the time.
Yeah, and how are they? I mean, I've found that they're quite good, but they're mostly prescribed medication. I have to say that, that's fine and well, but the actual tool side of things, the actual functioning tool side of things, it's, yeah, I'm not sure.
Definitely. So I think with the psychiatrist, like you said, they mostly do the prescription side.
Yeah.
And then you've got your psychologist, which does a bit of psychotherapy, but skills wise, there's not much support.
No.
In the public sector.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of difficulty, but you do so they had OT sessions before, which is now moved to one of the clinics. So that's a bit of a problem with a very long waiting list.
Yeah.
But I do find sometimes they've got groups like your mindfulness groups and that kind of support systems in place. But skills, definitely not.
Okay. So would you guys like, I mean, it's just a small group of us tonight. Would you like us to focus more on the ADHD, ASD side of the emotions? Or, because Leanne, you're also interested in that. Ivandra, you're also interested in that. And so is Michelle.
Definitely.
Yeah, so we were going to do more of the ADHD. So Bianca, maybe, I think this is going to be your one then. Because Bianca is ASD and ADHD, and the rest of us are ADHD. I know I'm a bit crazy, but I don't think I'm ASD. I'd be a lot brighter. I'd shine in the night. But maybe, do you want to use a presentation and go through it, or do you want to just talk about it? Because the ADHD and the difference between having just ADHD and your high emotions and the RSD compared to the ADHD and ASD and managing your emotions.
Tracy, can I ask you to explain the acronyms? Because, so you're saying ASD is?
Autism spectrum.
Disorder.
Sorry, Tracy.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Bianca?
So ASD is your autism spectrum disorder, which now also includes your Asperger's. And then your ADHD is your attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So in the past couple of years, so prior to 2018, if I'm not mistaken, you could only have one diagnosis. But post 2018, it's now become possible to have a dual diagnosis. And though the lines are quite blurred with ADHD and ASD because they present quite similar, the actual where it differentiates is when you look at the background, the behavior, the reason for the behavior. So that would you like to say something, Michelle?
I was just interested to get an example of that, if you had one.
So an ADHD meltdown would look like, I don't want to brush my teeth because I just don't want to. I think it's too much work, or I'm busy doing something else. And ASD meltdown would be, I don't want to brush my teeth because my mouth is so sensitive that I actually feel every bristle and it hurts. So usually with ASD, when the meltdown is related to autism, it has to do with some form of it's either pain, so it's usually always a sensory issue, or it's some form of discomfort. Whereas with ADHD, it's more a situation of, I can't get my body to do this. My mind doesn't want to do this. I know I should, but I can't, basically. So that's the difference between the two. Your behavior highlights.
I mean, from my point of view, just for interest's sake, we have a situation where our family, there's two of us are ADHD and Chris is definitely Asperger's. And there's a distinct difference in the way we think. We are definitely bigger picture thinkers, and Crispin is much narrower, you know. Our emotional, you know, like we had an interesting day today because Chris started driving, and driving is a very interesting experience because there's a lot of stuff going on, you know, a lot of, and it's just interesting to see how she handles it emotionally versus me, who's more ADHD. And obviously I've driven for years now. So, and I didn't know I had ADHD until recently. So when we learned to drive, you know, the reason I had accidents, for instance, that has explained, that's been explained to me now, because of the ADHD. I was like, the facts are, you have more accidents. And now that I'm aware of it, I have less accidents, you know.
So sensory issues do play a very big role. So it depends, because sometimes you can be hyposensitive, which means you don't feel anything, or senses don't affect you, so you're sensory seeking. And other times you try to avoid sensory issues because it's more of a painful situation. So it depends on how she's experiencing it. And influx, like for me, driving, if you take driving and as an example, there's so much happening. Like you said, you're the bigger picture person. So you have the ability to think about what the next driver is going to do, to focus on the traffic lights in the front of you, on your pedestrians. For people with ASD, it takes a lot of practice to be able to do that. We are not naturally inclined to do that. So you focus on your immediate situation. You focus on one thing at a time. And a lot of the time we also have a processing delay. So it takes us a second to think it through and then carry it out. So those are some of the challenges you'll face when it comes to a situation like driving, for example.
Yeah.
And
spatial as well, sort of a spatial disorientation in a way, because, you know, that sort of yeah.
Strangely enough, Michelle, that's actually something, I wouldn't say a comorbidity, but you do find a lot of individuals with ASD, not all of them, have spatial issues, myself included. I used to have a major issue with trying to judge how big a container needs to be to fit in a certain amount of food. So I'd look at the food and look at the container and I'd put it all in and it won't fit. And my son, who is now 11 years old, has the same challenge. But there are several exercises that you can do to work on that and to basically start being able to judge basically faces. Yes, but spatial issues is definitely one of them. If you noticed, a lot of individuals with ASD also have a hard time crossing the road because they can't judge how far a car is. So they'll rather cross when the car is really, really far and actually wait, and people can get agitated with you because you're not certain. You can be very clumsy because you're not sure if you can fit into a certain space. So you actually try to fit through a very small space and end up hurting yourself or constantly being blue. So spatial issues is definitely one of our challenges.
And I think that's sort of, you know, that sort of functionality, understanding that and then learning how to cope with that. For me, when I kind of try and, even going down the passage from my room, for instance, I kind of do everything and I notice that sort of way of coping is sort everything out in this room first, then go down. But that can delay you a lot in time. And when you get into time urgency, learning tools around, okay, what can I leave out? What can I not do in the space that'll speed me up, just to get down the passage to the kitchen kind of thing sometimes, So
a simple example of that is a lot of individuals at school don't know how to summarize because everything is important. You'll find they've highlighted the whole book because they can't distinguish between what's important and what's unnecessary facts or unnecessary information. So that is definitely one of those challenges again. But practice, a lot of practice. I think that's the solution. That's the coping mechanism. And with ASD, I think one of the vital points, one of the vital tools you can have when you're dealing with an individual with ASD is information. So when they understand what is happening, they're then able to grasp the entire picture. So when you say you get the bigger picture, to an individual with ASD, you've got to explain how you get from A to B to C to D in detail, so they can process it and then follow that through. So a lot of times, because we also take things very literally, so when you say something, my son, for example, if you tell him, go put on your tackies or go put on shoes. Mommy, which shoes? Shoes. You said shoes. He'll come out with sandals and he's going outside and it's ice cold. And you're like, so you've got to be specific. That wasn't a very clear example, but with us, you've got to be I'll give you a silly example. So on my way to Tracy one day, we got stuck. There was a problem with our car, and another one of the other coaches that was also on her way she was sort of stuck, but she was stuck inside because she had load shedding and her gate wouldn't open. So I told Tracy I'm stuck. Tracy assumed that I was stuck at home or that I was also having an issue with load shedding. I think after an hour or two, she asked me something and I answered her and I mentioned that we were like, I think just a few roads away from her or something. And the type of miscommunication that happened there was basically because the way I would explain something and the way she would explain something would be very different. So oftentimes when people say things, I tend to go and I research it or I'll question it. But we also not inclined to question. So you've got to develop the skill of learning to question. So you'll sit there and try to figure it out. And I found like a lot through life. I could have saved myself a lot of trauma had I just asked more questions, or had the other individual understood that I needed a bit more information to be able to join the dots. And so that's the one thing when it comes to communication is we take things very literally, and we definitely kick against, or we definitely resist anything that we don't understand. So also, like simple examples is I need prior warning in order to emotionally and physically be in a position to do things. So I was like, I've learned now to be more flexible, but initially I was very set on my routine. Flexibility was a very, very difficult task, to the point where I would shut down. But now that I've gotten to know myself and my challenges and my weaknesses and my strengths, it has made life so much easier to navigate and to proceed and be successful, because the challenges we face on the spectrum, especially if you are a level 1, there's not much support, and people tend to overlook that. And it tends to only tends to only be highlighted when you have a burnout or things start falling apart as an adult and nobody understands what is actually happening to you. And I think that is the major challenge, support, especially for adolescents in transition. And for adults, I found that recently a lot of support has come out for kids, like for my children, like, for example, but it's also very misunderstood. And a very valuable lesson that I've learned as an individual with ASD and as a parent is the support we tend to give is often not the support that the individual needs. And people assume because you're on the spectrum, you just existing and they know what's best for you. And strangely enough, if you take the time to actually listen to an individual, or actually just look at their behaviors and really pay attention, they are more likely to communicate exactly what they need. And I know that it's very challenging, especially with emotions, to get that, to express ourselves. So we still have, with ASD, there's a lot of difficulty when it comes to expressing your emotions. So with ADHD, you do get dysregulations where you have intense emotions. But the difference is usually, and most often with ASD, your emotions we're trying to communicate something. And because it takes us time to process, or it takes us time, usually when you're having a difficult time, a really hard time communicating your emotions, you're not able to. So you tend to either explode or shut down, in order because it becomes so overwhelming. And in situations like that, it's usually best for the support person or the other individual to stay calm and try to be regulated, because if you are dysregulated, you're just going to dysregulate the other person even more, the individual with ASD even more. So staying calm and regulating yourself and giving them that opportunity to regulate, because you're not going to get anything out of a person that's dysregulated, and eventually talking about it. The one thing with ASD though is you're going to have to repeat that 1,000 times over, and you're going to have to explain it in detail. So the 1,000 times over would be more with your kids, especially if they don't understand what you're trying to communicate. But like I said, for me, the vital key was communicating and actually explaining what is happening. So the minute you've got a detailed picture, and you can form, because individuals with ASD tend to think in pictures. We don't think in words. So if you give me words, that's why we take time to process, because you give me words, I've got to turn those words into pictures so that it can make sense for me. I'm not sure if you're getting what I'm trying to say. So pictures is a very useful tool when it comes to communicating with individuals. And so with your level 1 individuals, basically you'd find that if you give them details, because they've got the cognitive ability to put those details together and form a picture. The more detail you
can you give me an example again? Because, it's just for interest's sake. How would you communicate in pictures with somebody? I mean, or how would you do that? How would you do it visually?
Okay, can you just give me a second? Let me get you an example. So, for example, I'm tasked to present a presentation about emotional dysregulation. So I've got to think what emotional dysregulation looks like. So I've got words that mean sad, happy. But when I'm trying to explain it, when I'm trying to put it together in my mind as to how what it must look like, I see a picture. So I see a happy person, a person all crazy because they're freaking out because they're overwhelmed. When I look at someone, when you tell me somebody's bottling up their feelings, so generally it is something I'll think of literally, somebody bottling up their feelings, taking their feelings and putting it in a bottle. So I've got to think that through. So when you explain to me, no, bottling up your feelings means keeping it all in. To me, it's then a picture of a bottle with the person inside it, because all their feelings are inside the bottle. So it's basically descriptive, being descriptive in whatever you say. So if you tell me, go and get the dessert spoon, I will stand there for the next 5 minutes and look at the different dessert spoons and wonder, did you say the one with the flowers, the one with the lines, the one, so which one is actually the right one? So it causes a lot of so miscommunication is usually the reason why there's a lot of frustration. And when it comes to communication, individuals with ASD already have a hard time communicating and expressing themselves. And because there's so much, there's this mishap, this miscommunication where there's too little information from the one side, and the other side is frustrated because they're not meeting, their needs are not being met. So you tend to have that, then it becomes difficult to express yourself if you are following what I'm saying. So when I'm under pressure to say something, or if you ask me something on a whim, do you want blue or green? So now to somebody else, you either want the blue bottle or the green bottle. For me, it is, okay, the blue bottle I usually drink water out of. The green bottle is usually for my juice. You are offering me water, so I cannot have water out of the blue bottle. I've got to have it out of, so I've got to go through that whole thought process before I can answer you. But by the time I get to the end of it, you've moved on, or you've gotten irritated with me, and now I've irritated you. Now I shut down because now it's just a tantrum or meltdown, in other words. So now it just becomes a meltdown because I'm now overwhelmed with the fact that I was busy processing, and now you are shouting and you angry, and I don't know how to handle the situation. So that's where a lot of frustration comes from.
So for me particularly, I never thought of ASD before one of the sessions when Bianca was explaining her story, and I realized I have a lot of those special signs that you were talking about. For instance, I always thought that I'm way too clumsy. Like I always have my legs bruised, always, because I never know if I'm going to fit in this space, and I'm always bumping myself. My car is always like scratched all around because I have no idea what are the dimensions of the car, if I can fit here for parking. And the containers thing is something very funny. I never know. I will always, the containers is something special. I'm not even trying to go through it. And there's also the thing of taking things literally. I do take things literally. And also, I think I'm a sarcastic person, but no one ever understands that I'm being sarcastic because I say things very, very literally. And I have a tough time understanding sarcasm. But I never thought of ASD before that day. And the thing is, the concerning signs of ASD that concern me the most, they are emerging now at a later stage. Like, for instance, I always thought that I don't like people. I always had problems with being around people, like especially strangers. But I'm a very good communicator. I communicate very clearly. I don't have challenges to communicate. But what started concerning me the most and thinking of the possibility of ASD, as I said, I changed jobs like 6 years ago, nearly 6 years ago. And I have to interact a lot with people providing training in 4 countries. So what was happening throughout the job is that sometimes I had to travel 4 weeks in a row, providing training to a lot of people in many countries. And after 1 month of traveling, I would get exhausted, completely absorbed by the people, and I would cry, like literally cry, like spend days crying and in mood swings. But what is concerning me the most is that nowadays my anxiety to see people, like the meltdown, doesn't happen after I see them. It's before I see them. The very thought of seeing people makes me very nervous. This is what is concerning me. So I remember that last year I had to cancel my activities for the whole fourth quarter of the year, because just by touching or just by typing the materials for the training, I would start crying. So October, November, and mostly November and December, I couldn't do anything. I called my boss and I explained to him. He was very understanding because he has a son with a severe autism spectrum disorder. But now, the thing that you're talking about the picture, Bianca, for me is an advantage. I do that a lot. If you give me information, I have to convert the information into a certain pattern or a picture or a situation. And in that way, I never forget what I learned. And I put them in sort of drawers in my cupboard. So you give me the information, I convert into the picture I want. And from that moment on, I know exactly where it should go in my drawers, like in my wardrobe, and I will never forget. So for me, that is an advantage, not a disadvantage. I use it to my advantage because I have my own interpretation of it, and it's very clear for me to really understand and have my own way of always knowing it.
That is definitely an advantage, Ivandra. And what I would advise you to do when it comes to your meltdowns is you need to make sure you have a space. So if you have a really busy day, don't come home and push through and push through. Give yourself a break, a space where you are just allowed to be, I call it my autistic self. So if I had to go in detail, I get home. The first thing to go is the clothes because the sensory issues are hectic. And I will let my family know, guys, I just need to be. So I would just lay in the room and I relax. And if you feel the need to cry, then cry. You'll find that once you've developed a system of how to deal with your meltdowns and how to allow yourself those meltdowns and that space to actually melt down, that you'll be able to function without having a major setback like weeks or months. So the danger of not allowing yourself to melt down is having a burnout, and that could last anything from a few weeks to years. And that is something I personally would want to avoid ever happening to me again. And my experience with it, and also speaking to other individuals that have experienced it, is that basically giving yourself the space to be you, to be authentic, to get rid of your whatever stimulated you, because usually you're overstimulated, all your senses are firing up, and it's so overwhelming that the only recourse your body has is to melt down. And like I said, sometimes you will completely melt down, and allow yourself that space to melt down, but have a plan, have a structure in place. So I've learned a lot with my skills to how to, like I've put an emergency kit together, what I call my meltdown kit. So like I said, number one is allow yourself that space, that where there is no interruption, where it's just you, and allowing yourself to calm down, to regulate your emotions, to regulate your feelings and your body, because your senses are basically what's in overdrive at that time. And once you've had that meltdown, you can then carry on, pick yourself up and move on. That, like I said, will avoid you having those meltdowns that happen unintentionally in the middle of something. like at work. So I found that when I give myself that space to melt down, so I try to plan in advance. So if I'm going to have a really, really hectic situation on Saturday, I will basically spend my time preparing for Saturday. So preparation is key. So you make sure you are well prepared for what is about to happen. You are emotionally and physically ready. So you try to take care of all the nitty-gritties to make sure that that doesn't also impact your experience. And once you've sorted that out and you've gone through the event and you've done that, get home, whatever your chosen method is. So like I said, I've got a sensory issue with clothing. So I know when a meltdown is coming because I could be wearing a top the whole day, but at some point it starts hurting. And when it starts hurting, I know I've reached my threshold. It's time to remove myself from the situation. So if I'm in the shops, for example, after a while, I will start feeling uncomfortable, and I'll tell my husband, I think it's time we need to go home. I'm going to have a meltdown if I don't. And I will get home. So most of the time now, I am able to avoid going into a complete meltdown and just getting to the point where I will get to my safe space, my quiet space, regulate, and I'm able to, after an hour or two, pick up again and move on. And strangely enough, you actually feel that minute where it clicks, where I'm fine now, I can carry on. So getting to know yourself and your triggers and your tells, because there's a tell, you just need to really pay attention to your tell, and that'll tell you like your body is now at a point where it's, you need to.
Also, I think from me observationally, even from the ADHD point of view, I noticed that Kristen will actually, when she gets into that space, she actually will blame her body, herself, and so in, almost turning it inside against yourself, and instead of recognizing it's just the way it is, and it's actually not necessarily your fault, and not to internalize it and then punish yourself, you tend to want to kind of punish yourself. Now that it's a failure, these feelings are completely overwhelmed, I can't cope with at all with life, that sort of story. Certainly ADHD, I mean, there are definitely times where I might have 2 or 3 hours where I just get nothing much done. I try, get a few things done in a linear fashion, and it's just not happening. And I've learned that I can actually just go, you know what, I'm just having an overwhelmed day, it's too much, and there's too much going on around me. So I need to wait until there's quiet time, and I don't blame myself as much anymore. Whereas I would actually feel really like a failure. And I think that definitely ASD, that really, and there's this rigidity that is very strict with ASD. With ADHD is a lot more, I don't know, careless, if you want to call it, but yeah, ASD I think is very strict,
The problem comes in, Michelle, is when you've got a dual diagnosis, because now you've got this all over the place part and this rigid part, and they've got to work together. And it is like an internal war. So for an individual with ASD, having that meltdown is taking time away from your routine. So how am I going to get back on routine? Years back, I had a major problem with that, because I would wake up in the morning, and if my routine was off by 10 o'clock, my day was over. Nothing could proceed. I actually literally had to go to bed tonight to wake up tomorrow morning to start again. So I used to have major difficulty with that. And I had to develop the skills to actually allow myself a system to reboot in the middle of the day, and not having to go through an entire process to restart. So I had
May you please explain how do you reboot in the middle of the day?
that is that. So Ivandra, what I would do is so I've taken the skills that I've learned with Tracy, that where you've got your ADHD skills, and I've basically adapted it to myself. So with ASD, it's a very individual process. So like I would need to know what works for you. Like so for me, certain things I do, like it's sort of a ritual. So if I'm having a meltdown, for example, or if my day is off and something just bombed it up, I would take a step back and I would allow myself to sort of ritualistically end the day. So whether that is, for me, that is, okay, I'm going to go lay on the bed for 10 minutes and it's going to be my sleep time. Like, because normally for me to reboot, I need to sleep. So I would literally go and lay on the bed. And that's if I'm at home. I'd go and lay on the bed. I'd have like a sleep moment. And then I'd like wake up like I'm supposed to wake up. If for you, it's, for example, you get up in the morning and you have a glass of juice to start your routine. So whatever your routine would be. So I have a midday routine if that happens in the middle of the day. If I'm somewhere and I'm in public, I will either remove myself from the situation. If I'm not able to, I have a quiet space. So like when I'm visiting Tracy or when we've got something happening, well, Tracy knows my tells by now, so I'll just go quiet and I will either sit by myself and just try to regulate, and then I will carry on from there. It does take a lot of practice. And like I said, it's a very individual thing. So so certain music, certain songs that I like, I will include in that. I've got a bracelet that I got from Tracy. So it's basically, what I do is I use the bracelet to remind myself that everything is okay right here, right now. So that's also part of my ritual. So it's like I said, it's very individual. It depends on what works for you, but you need to make sure that you regulate.
I decided to create an alter ego to help me with those situations. So if I know that the day is going to be very, very tough, so who goes to work that day is my alter ego. If I'm going to meet a lot of strangers, I send my alter ego to do it for me.
That's lovely.
I do exactly the same. I do exactly the same. So when I'm having like everybody laughs because I pitch up and I'm like, okay, so I'm masking today. So I get dressed in a certain way. I do my hair in a certain way. Sometimes I'll do makeup. But I have, so I did that for many years as an advocate. And, but the mistake I made was I never allowed my authentic self any space during that time. And that went on for most of my life, and that led to a burnout. Now, I tell myself, I prepare myself, okay, tomorrow there's this meeting happening, it's time to mask. So, I will put on, like you said, your alter ego. I'll get all dressed up. I will go and I will do the meeting or the presentation. I will get home. The important part is I will get home. I will take off those clothes. I'll put on, so I've got a little thing that I wear that has no tags or anything, so it doesn't irritate me. So I'll either take that, or I have a blanket. It's got a certain texture that I like, so that usually calms me. And then I will just be my autistic self. Like I've come to accept, and I think that's the biggest part, accepting that you've got challenges and then building a structure or having a plan as to how I need to deal with these challenges. It's because we are born with autism and we are going to die with autism. We are autistic, and it's part of who we are. And the sooner you accept that, well, for me, the sooner I accepted that and I learned and I got to know myself, life became so much easier. And it doesn't mean you've got to go out in public and tell the world I'm autistic or I'm having these challenges, but it's all about getting to know yourself in such a way that you know how to cope and you know how to meet your needs without leading to that complete burnout. And like I said, I've been there, and it is basically, if I had to describe it, to me, it was my mind shutting down. My whole life, I relied on my mind because intellectually I was doing really well. And then to get to a point that one thing you relied on your whole life just stops working. I remember the doctor looking at me when I said to him, my brain is not working. My brain is broken, it's not working. And they thought I was crazy. And I tried to explain to them, but my brain is not working. It's not functioning. And it took them a while to grasp what I was trying to say. And that is why I always stress the vital importance of giving yourself that space to be authentic.
One of the challenges possibly is the inability to almost switch off, actually. You know, it almost being on like 150% overdrive all the time because you're coping with so many different areas at the same time. And then constantly also working against the sense of failure. So you never allow yourself to actually just switch off. And I think that learning that balance possibly, and the challenge from my point of view is recognizing the strengths and working with the strengths, you know, so that learning how, for instance, I mean, that the thing you said about summarizing everything and not knowing what to do. Studying a degree, for instance, in that environment is exhausting because they give you so much information, not knowing how to put it into visual, packages, and also not knowing how to even start to deal with the volume that comes your way is exhausting. So you tend to go into like this overdrive. Okay, I'll just do it all, and not switch off ever. You know what I mean? So learning how to package, well, what am I strong at? Because I'm very strong at going through all that information and being able to tell people afterwards, but it takes me a very long time to do it. So learning how to work with that and balance time off in between, is quite hard.
Yes, it is. Executive dysfunction comes with ADHD. So if you've got ADHD coupled with ASD, having to navigate that is really difficult. And for me, what I've done is like, I've had to learn, because I homeschool my kids, and I've had to learn, and I've had to put structures in place for them to avoid a lot of pitfalls. And so I tried to look at the individual strengths and weaknesses. What I did was, with them still being really young, they got psychometric testing, and that highlighted a lot for me. And then also being ASD myself, knowing the struggles I went through, I sat down and I tried to, so each of them, both my kids are ASD and ADHD, but they both present very differently, and they both, they cope differently, and they've got different strengths and weaknesses. So it took me quite a while to sit down, and still now I sit down and I observe their behavior. And a lot of what I've had to do was adapt. So I would take my skills and I would adapt it to the individual, to my son or to my daughter, in the way I know it would work for them. So, for example, when we do life skills, So life skills is one of the really, really tough areas for individuals with ASD. And there's also a lot of difficulty that comes from the ADHD side. And so social stories, the ones I came across wasn't always, I didn't feel that it met their needs. So I'm always adapting things. And I think that is how I've learned. I've learned to actually to cope, because a lot of what I adapt for them, I also adapt for myself. And I think that for me, I've been in that mode since I've had kids, that I needed to get the message across, or needed to give them the space to be successful individuals without having that burnout, that sacrifice that I've had to make. And teaching them that you've got to have that time out, teaching them to work with their strengths and their weaknesses. And that's a very important thing, you know, identifying your strengths and acknowledging your challenges. And once you've got structures in place to aid you with those challenges, it makes it so much easier not to punish yourself. For my son, for example, he initially, when he'd do a spelling test, and I was the same, he'd get 9 out of 10 and the world was ending, he would cry and he was all over the place, emotional. And I had to get him to a point where I got him to see that 9 out of 10 was very good, but also that even though you got 9 out of 10, it hurts. Feel those feelings. But like you said, he'd punish himself. And that was the hard part, hit himself in the head, or wanting to hurt himself for disappointing me, and getting that message across that, you know, you didn't disappoint me. And explaining to him that, you know, mistakes are part of life. And you know what, I'm a mommy and I don't know all the answers, and I also make mistakes. And being able to go back to them and apologize, like, you know, saying, I'm sorry, I did XYZ wrong. And one very important thing with individuals with ASD is they're very knowledgeable on certain subjects. And I've got to a point where my husband also now knows that we appreciate that information, and we tell them, you know, thank you, we didn't know that. And like I said, with them still being young and homeschooling, I've also got the opportunity to basically give them the opportunities to exercise their strengths, and do the very minimum when it comes to their challenges. So there's a lot of accommodations that you can get as an individual with ASD, and not because you are not competent, because most of us are extremely competent. The only thing is communication styles differ. So where we need a little bit more time to think or to process, those accommodations can be put in place. So you've got your universities and your schools that actually offer you those accommodations. And if you are an individual with those challenges, it is very important to make use of those accommodations. And 90% of what gets any of us through is a very good support system, but also understanding the type of support we need. Because you find a lot of parents wanting to give their autistic child a neurotypical type of support, which is not going to work for you. Or because it's worked for one autistic child, it needs to work for all of you. It doesn't work that way. We all have different sensitivities. We all have different strengths. And the difficulty with ASD is, if I've got a certain strength and there's something that I find challenging, whether you threaten my life, I'm not going to do it. When you are authentically autistic, which will, if you're autistic, it comes out at some point. You cannot hide it forever. And you are where you can try and fit your ADHD individual in a box and they'll try to fit in. That autistic child is just never going to fit in. and we have so much to offer when it comes to knowledge. And once you find something you're passionate about, and it usually starts as a child, you can be brilliant at it, but you need the correct support. So it takes a bit of homework and navigating. And for me, what I usually say is 90% is just first observing, just having a conversation with the individual, just letting them tell you about anything and everything, and seeing their reactions. And that will give you so much information as to how to deal with or how to best support an individual. And you can go on to be so successful. But a lot of individuals with ASD don't reach that point, or reach that point and burn out because of the lack of proper support, the lack of decent self-care. And because we are not taught that you need that space to melt down, or you need that space to regulate. All we are taught is to mimic what the next person does. And especially individuals with a level 1, for me, most of my life, I studied what everybody else did. And I passed as neurotypical because I could do what everybody else could do, although it took my all to do it. And I would end up having a meltdown when I came home. I could do it. But and that's the difficulty, like I said, because there's no real support. There's nobody out there that can teach you those skills, and that understand that you need to be taught those skills. And like I said, because we are so individual, how you would teach that skill needs to be adapted to that individual and their challenges and their strengths. And like I said, for me, the greatest thing was getting to know myself and knowing my tells, and a lot of things I didn't know, where Tracy pointed things out to me. And now having that knowledge, and knowing how to prepare myself emotionally to face a neurotypical world, but also knowing when to call a time out before it all blows up. Also knowing that I'm not going to, like when I'm at a party, because as an individual with ASD, we also enjoy having friends. We also enjoy going to a party or that kind of situation. I think knowing yourself means I know where to draw the line when I've had enough, but also that your circle of friends or your support system knows when it's time to leave. Your support system knows when, that tell that says, okay, she's had enough. And I think for me, because I've now done a lot of courses and training on ASD and ADHD, the greatest thing you can do is be prepared. If you have an individual with ASD in your life, or if you are an individual on the spectrum, the best thing you can do is prepare, because preparation is key. So if you find you prepared it, and if you've spent that time getting to know that person, you can avoid so many difficult situations, because you can pick up from the individual's body language. And a lot of times, the individual with ASD cannot tell you what is going on. Sometimes a meltdown is coming and I'm not sure why. And it could be as simple as something in your sock that is aggravating you, but you're not picking it up. And this comes from adults, not even just children. So it could just be something. For me, for one example was I was at the hospital one day and the lights were flickering like crazy, but I thought I could handle it. And that was still in my learning phase of getting to know myself and like, no, I can do this. And I could feel the light was irritating me, but I didn't know that the meltdown that ensued was actually directly linked do a sensory overload on that. And with sensory issues, it's not a constant. That's the other thing that I've learned. So an example of that would be, I was sitting next to one of the other coaches in one of our sessions, and she was just rubbing her jeans, and that usually doesn't affect me. But that specific day, I couldn't handle it. My senses just went into overdrive just by that sound. And so certain sounds might affect me on certain days, and on other days it won't. But it also then depends on the combination of sounds that's happening at the same time, or the combination of smells. So a lot of ASD emotions, and like when I think of ASD and emotions, it's emotion equals communication. So whatever the emotion is, there's an underlying reason, there's a trigger. So when you're dealing with a difficult emotion, look for the trigger, try and do what I've got with my kids. I've got a template for an autopsy. So you do an autopsy where you actually see what preceded the event. And that's how you pick up what their triggers are and how to navigate that. Tracy, I have now spoken for an hour.
Because we know so little, that's why. We're going to...
And she threw me in at the deep end after I did a whole presentation the whole day.
But you handled it. Tracy, you're on mute. We're gonna...
Yeah,
we have 1,000 questions, but I think Bianca must do a topic list, because
Yes.
there's so little information based on diagnosis and people not getting information from psychiatrists and everything else. So we'll definitely get back into this topic, but well done, Bianca, for
Well
being
done,
thrown
Bianca.
in.
You swam, Dory, you swam. Thank you. That was really interesting. Every time I listen to you, I learn more and more. So it makes me realize how little I know. Anyway, have a good evening. Thanks, guys. And we'll look forward to ADHD support group meeting next month. Until then, Toots will see you when she sees you. Ta-ta.
Cheers. Bye.
Hi, Jamie.
Bye.
Bye.